everybody. We're here in the studio today. It is December 27th. We just wrapped up a big holiday weekend. And we're going to be taking a little bit of a journey today with a really incredible woman, Gwen Webber-McLeod, who has joined us here today for our initial segment on women who make the world a better place. So I originally connected with Gwen through a colleague of mine, Sarisa Richardson. She's actually part of my business with Arbonne International. And Gwen has just become this beacon of light in my life for so many reasons, and some of them which continue to unfold on a regular basis, including today meeting. So I'm going to turn it over to her because we want to share with you some stories today about creating space for people to share in dialogue, creating space for people to grow in their leadership and their authenticity. And, you know, we're just going to let this conversation unfold because one of the things that we have discovered together is that there's a story that needs to be told here. And just like this podcast developed out of the need to share some of the news out there in the world that deserves to be heard, women who make a difference in this world, men who make a difference in this world, ideas, inspiration, and then sharing some of our entrepreneurs and upcoming businesses out and about in the community. There's a conversation waiting to be had here. So, Gwen, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming.
I'm really thrilled to be here, Melissa. It's great to be back in Seneca Falls.
Yeah. So this is a big return, if you will, because we talked about some of your roots here.
Absolutely.
Right? So you were the third executive director of the Women's Hall of Fame.
I was.
So tell us a little bit about that.
I will. You know, it's really interesting and probably no accident that I'm here today because I'm really at this interesting tipping point in my own career as a leader. But to give you a little background on myself, I am in the leadership development business because my own journey to leadership began very, very young. So I held my first mid-level executive position as a leader at the age of 24.
Wow.
And by the time I was 26 or 27, I was the executive director of a small not-for-profit agency in Auburn, New York. And when I was 28, I actually became the executive director of the National Women's Hall of Fame in Seneca Falls. And so my career as a leader took off like a shot in my 20s. And it was probably then that I really began observing that your journey to leadership is very intriguing in that you can either let it happen to you or that you can decide consciously the type of leader you want to be that person, live in that space authentically, and regardless of your age, your gender, race, creed, color, sexual orientation, really trigger changes in people's lives. And so through that experience over 20-some years, 30-some years of my career, in around 2006 or 2007, I decided to incorporate Gwen Inc., which I call my legacy building business. And Gwen Inc. is the result of a career that involved a number of years as a not-for-profit executive. I became an entrepreneur in 1990. My first business was Treble Associates, along with Melina Carnicelli and Bevan Angier. And then through a very difficult 10 years in my life, I call it my season of grief, there was this period of time where in 1995, my daughter was diagnosed with cancer, December 22nd, 1995. Wow. And it put me in this space where in order to manage that, it just triggered forward. Like every year there were these significant deaths or illnesses in my family that I needed to do something to distract me from being grief-stricken. So I started to fantasize about a company that I wanted to own, and I just incubated this idea. And in 2006, this is the truth, I was driving home from a meeting in Rochester and heard in my head, the moment is now. And when I got home, I was on a phone call with a colleague that I served on a board with, who happens to now be my minister, who said to me, I think you've got something on your heart to do and you're afraid to do it. I said, well, tell me about that. So he sends me to the Bible to read this scripture, Jeremiah 29:11. And I needed Sunday school remediation because I had not been to church and whatever. But basically, it's about, that you're not going to be failed. So I immediately just went for it. So went back to graduate school, got my master's in management, and in 2007, took the step to launch this company, and I've been in the leadership development business ever since. And it was all fueled by my observations of what it was like for me to emerge as a woman leader and a woman of color who was leading at a high level throughout my career.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you've done a lot of work creating this model of yours with the idea of mentorship
Yes.
behind it. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I can. So, the mission of my company is that, and people always kind of question what we do, but the sole purpose of Gwen Inc. is to help leaders achieve their business goals by focusing on the competencies of confidence, competence, courage, and calm. And when I say that, people are like, well, those are attributes or qualities. And I say, no, they're actually competencies. I support and work with some of the best and brightest leaders across the country. And when I observe it, like what's at the root of their success, what I'm observing is that they have developed the skill of consistent confidence. They believe in themselves, their companies, their mission. They're competent not only technically, but they have a whole set of skills that enables them to be very skillful at building the right relationships, because I think relationships really matter, and I really think they're the only thing that do when it comes to getting things done. I'm finding that these folks are very courageous about standing for what they believe in, saying what needs to be said. And then I think calmness is critical, because everything, and I mean everything, rises and falls on our leadership. So they have really strategic self-care practices. So as I'm in the legacy building years of my career, I want to get younger emerging leaders to focus on those competencies earlier on, so that when they're my age, they don't find themselves struggling, wondering, who am I, what am I supposed to do? That if I can help them in their 20s focus on those 4 competencies, I think that it will make their journey to leadership much easier.
I love it. I love it. And it's interesting to me, you and I were having a conversation earlier about, discovering what our calling is,
Yes.
what our gifts are, and how to bring those to the table, how to lead from that space. And, one of the things that I notice in my peer group is that some of the drive behind what to do in life, and I'm sure this hasn't changed over generations, right? But some of the drive behind what to do in life, it comes from, what our parents say, what society tells us, what the norms around us socially, dictate. And so I find a lot of my friends, my colleagues waking up one day going like, what the hell is going on? So this kind of work is needed, where people really get in touch with what fuels me, what drives me, what is going to bring me the greatest satisfaction in this life, what's going to be most fulfilling. And it's interesting because for me, it comes back to a lot of what you speak of, which is relationship, right? And partnership and leadership. But that human relationship, that human connection is what it comes back to for me. So You Can't Fail is one of the nonprofit programs that connected us. And I know that, we look to create a collaboration potentially with Arbonne that has a grant program through our charitable foundation, and creating a program for even younger emerging leaders. So tell me a little bit about your vision for that. I mean, what drives you? What excites you? What motivates you when you think about that kind of program?
Well, You Can't Fail actually originally was part of my private sector company, and it was the result of, in my business, our clients, you name a leader, they're our clients. So anybody who either has been promoted to a position of leadership or self-defined, over time we've discovered are seeking out the particular kind of support that we offer, because our clients are only mid-level to executive level leaders who, and we work personally with them to help them get focused on who they are, what they say, what they believe, what they do is directly connected to their business organization's success. So one of the things that we specialize in, frankly, as the result of my master's degree research, which was looking at the leadership journeys for people of color, is that we specialize in supporting emerging women and minority leaders in their own unique journey to leadership. And one of the reasons that we do that is because the findings, and this is going on in my life every day actually, is that often women leaders and minority leaders are experienced as what I call the unexpected leader. People don't see them coming. We often break through glass ceilings, and when we do it, these dynamics start to happen. We're the first and the only. right? So on the part that, there's all a celebration about being a history maker, but behind the scenes, you're very isolated. These types of leaders struggle with gaining and sustaining credibility. And I sometimes think about my time here in Seneca Falls and how I sometimes felt like I was like this new exotic animal in the zoo because I was very young. I was a woman of color. And there were times when people would just kind of come and look at me and go like, we just kind of wanted to see who you were, right? And so when people aren't used to you being the leader, it's hard to gain and sustain credibility because they're used to being led by certain types of people. And then the other thing I observed is that this group of leaders is deeply concerned about paying their leadership forward. And they are specifically concerned about creating pathways for other unexpecteds to find their way to leadership as well. So as a woman, I say I need to put my stiletto in the door and keep it open and pull all the young women through the door that I can. So I piloted a conference specifically for that target population. So You Can't Fail originally was a strategically designed multicultural leadership experience for women from all racial and ethnic backgrounds, where we just spent some of that time focusing on the unique journey of professional women of color. We piloted the business model in my private sector business for about 7 years. And then last year, I achieved the goal of spinning it out as its own freestanding not-for-profit. So it's part of my legacy building. The board of directors is all a multicultural group of women, all under the age of 40, and they now produce the conference, and we're going to also offer a set of services. The tagline for You Can't Fail is, you can't fail because your history says you can't. And I find so often with women leaders, and I would say this to a certain degree with all of my clients, but I see this specific to women leaders, that they know exactly what they want to do, but they're afraid to act on it. So I've so often have heard myself say, girl, for example, how could you even be nervous to try that when Harriet Tubman somehow figured out how to walk from Maryland through Auburn to Canada to help people? Like, how dare we think for 1 second that we can't do something? So we still stand on that tagline. And for me personally, I'm hoping that my history of leadership opens doors for other women leaders, other young leaders, and just women leaders in general who want to follow in my footsteps. So I'm very focused on that.
That's great. And that does tie right in with the message that I told you I received earlier today.
Yeah.
So driving in the car, coming back from holidays in Buffalo, New York, that's where I'm from. That's where I grew up. And and the message was so loud and clear that, when we want to plant a tree and we want it to do well, and it was actually on a talk show that I was listening to, that we plant it amongst, mature trees, because inevitably the roots will grow deeper and the connection, the ability to thrive in the forest is greater and able to produce more. Right. And so that is that very element of mentorship, leadership, giving back that you're talking about.
I think that's a beautiful analogy. And I think when you shared that with me, it really resonated with me. And I truly feel like I have a historical obligation to mentor other women and to use my experience as a woman and then to specifically mentor emerging leaders of color. And so, spiritually, when I think about my career journey, I don't think it was an accident at all that I was the third executive director of the National Women's Hall of Fame at a very early point in my career. And geographically in Auburn, where I live, my house is located between where Harriet Tubman is buried and where she lived. And so some of my friends are like, here she goes, she's having a seance again. But I feel strongly about that. And if it's really not spiritual in connection, on the earthly plane, the fact that I have these visual indicators all the time from my historical sisters here in Seneca Falls and that strong woman in Auburn and throughout this region, it gives me courage. I really think about it. I mean, there are days I'm thinking, do I really want, there's a moment every morning, Melissa, when I wake up like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this. To be an entrepreneur and play really big, you have to take a certain amount of risk. It's scary. And then I'm reminded that why should I be afraid when, I think about Elizabeth Cady Stanton in that house with those kids, and that they just decided to have some tea and started a revolution, right? So it just gives me courage to do that. And their stories continue to mentor me. I'm living my life very intentionally and in a specific way to encourage other women and other leaders as well. I'm not only inspiring women leaders. I work with men. Most of my clients are men, to be honest with you, male leaders. And I'm inspiring them as well. And I really feel historically obligated to do that.
I love that. And I feel that history here in Seneca Falls as well. I feel that need to continue creating spaces of dialogue and bringing crucial conversations to the table. I know we have some big news in Seneca Falls these days, and I know Jim was part of the Seneca Falls plan that originally started to move this idea forward of deepening our own legacy with respect to being the birthplace of women's rights. And so the Center for Great Women is moving forward. I think the windows are in and looking beautiful over there. You want to talk a little bit about that, Jim?
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. I think that everybody in Seneca Falls isn't proud of the home of the Women's Hall of Fame, the National Women's Hall of Fame. And the vision for the Seneca Knitting Mill to become that home, that would fulfill the vision of a place that people would travel far and wide from and would go back and say, you got to go to Seneca Falls and see this. So I feel like that is like the major piece of the entire economic development plan in Seneca Falls. And frankly, to pay homage to the great women who are enshrined in the hall. And I don't know if it's a fair analogy, but a lot of times I'll liken it to the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown.
Absolutely.
When you go to the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, you leave and you're like, that was awesome. I'd love to come back. And you tell everybody when you go home, you've got to go to Cooperstown. And part of it is the town of Cooperstown is a nice town, just like Seneca Falls is, but you need that. You need the actual Hall of Fame to be impressive. And also, I feel it's a mistake to think that women's rights globally has reached a point where you just look at it historically.
Right.
There is a need for Seneca Falls to continue to be a beacon for women who are oppressed globally still today. Even in America, but globally, there are women without the most basic rights.
Right.
And so Seneca Falls still needs to play that role if we want to truly embrace the fact that we're the home and birthplace of women's rights. So the struggle should continue. And so part of our focus needs to be to provide support and awareness and education and all those things, whether it's hosting a conference on global women's issues here in Seneca Falls, or even creating a outlet where we can reach out globally through, the internet or through, set up like this podcast studio, for example. So all that can be realized in that new home, the Center for Great Women, when it's complete. And it's nice to see progress, because it's been many, many years that people who've supported the hall and supported our heritage here in Seneca Falls have been waiting to see something tangible materialize over there. So it's exciting.
Absolutely. I love the fact that you explained it that way, right? I never thought about it myself, but I do continue to think about women's rights as this historical thing, when in fact this is an ongoing conversation itself, right? And it's an ongoing struggle, and it's an ongoing movement globally, and even in our own communities still. So thank you for that, because I think I'm an intelligent enough woman to know that there's plenty of places in the world where the what women are going through is less than desirable. But
well, you can look at it as we haven't even elected a woman president of the United States. We thought it was going to happen this year, and if everybody in Seneca Falls was excited about that prospect, I think, because that is a benchmark of progress dating way back to Elizabeth Cady Stanton. You would have thought it would have happened by now. So there's that, but then there's, the women in a Taliban state or in other more third world countries who don't have basic rights, not let alone vote, but to own property or to make their own decisions on their own behalf, their property of their husbands. I mean, they're worse off than Elizabeth Cady Stanton was, 200 years ago here in Seneca Falls. So, there's the struggle for equality continues, and Seneca Falls should play a big role.
Thank you. Yeah. And that's Jim Sinacropi, folks, in case you haven't met him before. He is the owner of Finger Lakes One and the reason why we're all here today. So thanks for having us. But Gwen, what was it like for you as we were walking up to the building to look at this new space where, where you were once executive director is now going to be moving to?
Right. It's so exciting to me. I think when you've been at your career as long as I have, it's easy to forget the things that you've touched and how, I often say to my clients, as I said, they're all leaders trying to decide how their own legacies of leadership in their respective companies and organizations. And I think there was whispers about transitioning that building back in the 80s when I was here. And I mean, the Hall was it was a baby organization, It happened around the same time the Urban Cultural Park thing was going on here, and the National Park was coming to Seneca Falls. There was a lot of interesting tension around defining Seneca Falls history, either through its manufacturing history or through the lens of women's rights. So for me to walk up that canal and see that that's happening is really exciting for me. And I'm always looking for evidence that the way that I'm leading is making a difference. And so I, along connected with every other executive director of the Women's Hall of Fame, feel very proud that that's finally happening. And Jim, I would add you to this list that I keep in my office of the MWGUs. I have a list of men who get us. And I write a column called The Leadership Journey for the Auburn Citizen, the hometown newspaper. And my last column was about celebrating my MWGU crew. But it really inspires me to hear you talk like that, because I've also only been this successful because throughout my career there were a number of men, starting with my father, who have raised a house full of girls, we call ourselves the Webber girls, to believe that it's my birthright to have access to anything that I want to have access to as a citizen of the United States of America. So to really, we've had so much progress that, when I talked to my 31-year-old daughter, she was kind of, our work as a 70s feminist, right, kind of lulled a generation of women into thinking, it's not as bad because I can do things my grandmother couldn't do, even my mother couldn't do as a little girl. And I do think that the current political environment in our country has awakened this generation of women to think like, whoa, and so I think that we can't do this alone. We need to have the men who get us to be our allies, to join forces with us and to help us lead through these particular moments. And, even with my male clients that are CEOs of companies or executive leaders, we're frequently talking about that the census data is saying that the workforce moving forward is going to be filled with millennial leaders, that a significant percentage of those leaders will be people who are of the millennial generation, right, will be women, and they're thinking consciously about what do I need to do in my own company to make pathways, because it's still very true in most organizations, unless the organization is focused on women, that you can get to the top of organization and not see maybe one woman. She's the unexpected leader who broke through. Mm-hmm. So it's important for us all to focus on this, and I can't agree with you enough that we can't lose sight of the significant fact that a group of women sat in this community over tea, talked about the condition of their lives, and decided to do something about it. And I think we all should follow that lead, that if there's something going on in our lives, then we need to talk about it and then decide what we're going to do about that. I take Gwen Inc. as an example of my way of doing something about it, and my civic life, and I'm very much a social justice activist. All of that work that I do combined allows me to live one life that enables me to make that impact. So, Jim, I'm welcome to my crew.
Do I get a membership card?
You do. I'm going to throw a party for you all. You're amongst great men.
So your MWGUs are part of the men who make a difference in your life.
Right.
And so we don't have a separate guest today, but Jim is definitely one of those men here.
Right.
And on On that note, can you tell me, Gwen, who a couple of your great male role models or mentors have been in your life as well?
Yes, well, in my own family, my father, Charles Webber, my parents went to college at North Carolina A&T. It's a historic black college in the 50s. So it was during a time of segregation in our country. They graduated from college, my mother with a degree in education, my father with a degree in business, but he went ROTC to school. So he came out of college, a military officer in a segregated army. And my parents had my older sister, and then my father got stationed to Germany, and my mother was pregnant with me and boarded a ship as an Army officer's wife, but upon entry to the ship was relegated to stay down on the part of the ship where the porters lived because she was African American.
Wow.
And I think about that time, my parents just made a conscious decision that they were going to do some things strategically with their children to make sure that they learned, like literally, that it's our birthright to live in our country and do what we want. It just so happened that Charlie Webber wound up with 4 girls. So I can honestly say, Melissa, that even in the world that my parent raised us in, there was never a day of my life where we were not absolutely convinced that we could do or be anything we wanted to be. And now we giggle because they were telling us a bunch of public relations lies, right? Because really a lot of that stuff we legally couldn't do as women or as people of color. But I think my father's mission to make sure that his daughters lived fully in the world makes him one of my most important male role models. And of course, there's historical people like Martin Luther King and Gandhi. I mean, I'm pretty inspired by those men as well. More recently, my minister, Robert Wilson, that I talked to you about, really is a man who gets me and was really the person who gave me the courage to step out of that fear and encourage me to incorporate this company. And what I really learned from my conversation with him is that there's this writing that I read that starts, our greatest fear is not that we're inadequate, but that we might be powerful beyond measure. What was really going on with me is that I was feeling like I was powerful beyond measure, that I knew I could absolutely do it, but in my body, it felt physically the same way that it feels when you're afraid that you can't do something. So talking with Pastor Wilson really helped me identify that what was really going on with me is I absolutely knew I could incorporate this company and be successful. I just needed to take a step. So he's someone that I mention in my column. And another person who's more of a new generation MWGU is a young man who lives in Syracuse, New York. His name is Hassan Stevens. He's also the official college DJ for SU. So some of you might know him as DJ Maestro. And he's also a hip hop producer. And I met Hassan because he founded an organization called the Good Life Foundation for Youth, and he works with inner city youth, leveraging hip hop and life coaching to focus them on developing good skills and to focus them onto entrepreneurship. And Hassan inspires me daily. He's an intellectual powerhouse, like literally one of the greatest minds I speak with every day. But he really keeps me focused and energized to continue my work that I do with youth. And then I have some sons and a grandson who are also on my MWGU list. And their father, Tracy McLeod, also I mentioned in my article, is also high on my list of MWGUs. He just gets me. Everyone who knows me knows that I am a lot to deal with, to live with and to be married to. But I'm very blessed to live with a man whose spirit is large enough to hold all of who I am, who is unconditionally committed to me. And in my column, I say, people often refer to us as a power couple, but he really puts the power in our power couple status. So throughout my life, these men in particular, but I've always had men who mentored me, who were encouraging me when I would be that unexpected leader, that lone voice, that person who was courageous enough to sit in the boardroom and say, I'm not co-signing this because I don't think it's appropriate, and I'm the only woman, and have stood with and for me. And I continue to embrace male energy in my life and seek out male mentors as well.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
It's important. It's important. I know, you can be very extreme as a feminist and isolate yourself. And that has never worked for me and not been part of my professional strategy.
In my own life, the connection to fatherhood was a very shallow one. So I sought that kind of relationship over time and had many incredible male mentors throughout my life, and it is invaluable. We can't separate the conversation of men and women and expect to come out a whole leader and to really get results.
You can't.
Yeah.
You really can. It's similar to what I say to young African American folks that I mentor when they say, "Oh my God, I'm afraid to break the glass ceiling because I don't want to be isolated or alone in my journaling." I say, well, unless you move to a country that is predominantly Black, statistically speaking, it's high probability it's going to be just you.
Right.
So let's focus on developing a set of skills that's going to enable you to thrive in the face of sort of the joy and challenge of being an unexpected leader. And so I always encourage my mentees to have a multicultural group of mentors around them to help them navigate, and that we should never assume that I never assume that just because someone's male, they don't have the capacity to understand my journey as a woman leader. They may not have the day-to-day experience with it, but they certainly understand the journey to leadership. And as long as they're willing to believe that my truth is my truth, we're good.
Yeah.
I should add that my father was thrilled when we all got married and had sons. It was like boys in the family. He needed some testosterone, So.
Yeah, I was thinking that when you talked about, you and all of your sisters, like not only is there a lot of incredible energy there, but conversations at the dinner table with your family must have been incredible.
Yeah, we could have been a reality show.
Yeah.
We could have been a reality show, yeah. They were very interesting, because as progressive as he was, he also was very conservative about a lot of things. So there'd be these moments we'd be like, really, Dad? Did you just say that? While we have this mother who was like, oh, girls, let me tell you, and so literally when I say that there was never a day that we were absolutely convinced from very young that we could do or be anything, that was absolutely true. And we believed that. And we're all very successful entrepreneurs and leaders in our own right, all very different and unique women. But there's something to be said about, I would say this to the parents that are listening, about laying that foundation for leadership, being the most important leader in your own life from birth.
Yes.
From birth. Because literally, I go into Head Start classrooms and I see little toddlers that get it. Like I see confident, competent, courageous, and calm little people all the time. I do.
Yeah.
And I just think that we think that leadership is something that will just happen. And in my business, we're just intentional about inspiring people to define who they are, what they believe, what they're going to do, and what they're not going to tolerate, and then leading from that perspective. And it's always interesting to me when I also do executive coaching. We do our work in a number of ways out of Gwen Inc. But when I'm in one-on-ones with leaders, so often they're struggling, and they'll say, well, what's your gut telling you to do? And they'll tell me, and I'll say, from a technical point of view, that could be the right thing to do. What's intriguing to me, Melissa, is how often they'll say, well, could I just trust my gut and lead? I'd say, well, here's the secret. Most leaders I support that are doing well are being prompted by their gut instinct to do something. Yeah. So what we're really in the business of doing is helping people get in touch with who they really want to be as a person and leading from that point of view.
Yeah.
And the reason we should all do that is because employees have high BS detectors. They know when we're not being authentic.
Absolutely.
And inauthentic leaders create inauthentic environments that then lead to low trust, and there is a direct correlation between trust and performance. And so that's why I really come at my work the way that I do, and I use my own personal growth and development and ongoing growth and development as a leader to fuel how we interact with our clients.
Yeah.
I have a very cool little business.
You really do. I feel like
love my little business.
Every time
my friends are like, it's not so little, but in the scheme of things, it is. So.
Yeah. Every time we talk, we're peeling back more layers.
I've had an interesting life. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So one thing you touched on, and I want to talk a little bit more about, and it relates to something I'd like to talk about out and about in the community. You talked about fear. Mm-hmm. And I find in the work that I've had with other leaders in my business, in my collegiate life, fear is definitely one of the things that holds people back. And it's often that acronym, you know, false evidence appears real, right? It's something that we come up with in our head. It's that story, it's that obstacle that we've told ourselves and we start tripping over. And one of the women I came into contact with over the last few years wrote a book. She actually titled it Anxiety Breakthrough. This is Peg Houst-Arliss. She is a coach here in Seneca Falls, and her coaching platform is really from fear to freedom and breaking through that and breaking through those plateaus. But fear and anxiety, I find, is a common thread with a lot of the women entrepreneur groups that I'm part of. You know, breaking through these emotions that can create a lot of that isolation. And what has your experience been with that in your career?
Well, I think I just spoke to that a little bit. So I will just put this out there, that all of my clients, you kind of get the demographic that I'm working with, are leading in very high places with huge amounts of responsibility. And the thing that takes my breath away about what they do and frankly what I do is that when we all do it well, every decision we make is changing the trajectory of generations of people's lives. And so when I'm working with leaders who are talking to me about being fearful, what's really going on at the gut level is that they're feeling the heaviness of the responsibility of being in charge of something. That's including parenthood, right? So in my business, we inspire people to live one life. So to figure out who you are and to be that person everywhere you are. So a lot of times when my clients are talking to me about being fearful, as I mentioned, there's a moment I wake up almost every day like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this, right? That I say that fear is a factor in leadership. And so we have to immediately develop some courage strategies, which is why courage is a competency that we work on in our business. But the other thing I often challenge women leaders about, because what I'm observing about a lot of women leaders is that they know exactly what they want to do. They're just fearful to do it. And so a lot of women leaders will avoid speaking it because I observe that when you speak it, it's impossible to ignore that you know exactly what you want to do. Whether that be an entrepreneur, get out of a relationship, stay in a relationship, all those life decisions people make. I've never met a woman that if I lovingly challenge her long enough, does not know exactly what she wants to do. And I also ask them to investigate, are you really afraid or are you in powerful beyond measure mode? Because women that are on the cusp of entrepreneurship only get to the cusp of entrepreneurship because they know they can do it, right? I don't know a lot of women that take that risk, that believe that they can't do it. And so a lot of my work is about supporting people through that process of examination. Like, are you really afraid? Or is it that you know you absolutely can do it, and the minute you take the step, there's no turning back? And so they could be on the same continuum, but I think when I support women leaders, and my male clients as well, and identifying that what's maybe going on is that they're in powerful beyond measure mode, then the strategies come around. What do we need to do to keep you courageous enough to do it? So in my world, what I do, I hired an executive coach. And I surrounded myself with once I got clear that I was going to do this, like there was no turning back, I did the big reveal. I surrounded myself with what I call my infrastructure team, and they still exist. Their sole purpose is to keep me courageous and not let me do anything crazy. And that's crazy like makeup, like crazy stuff. Like take a bad business risk or whatever, So it's a combination of lawyers and attorneys and those kind of people. Yeah. But there's also people just in my inner circle who will pull the back of my blazer and say, come here, girl. Like, you should not be out there saying that or doing that, right? So that's what we do in my executive coaching aspect of my company. And really challenging people. I ask the question, are you really afraid? Or is there a piece of your DNA that knows you absolutely can do this? And if you say it out loud, there's no other option than to do it. Once we get clear about that, then I can help people develop the strategies to help them be successful. If it's genuinely fear, I think we have to develop courage strategies. Like, what would you really do if that happened?
It's interesting. I run a business, and there hasn't been a day that I haven't been scared.
There you go.
Since
you're on the right path.
It's been almost 20 years now.
Right.
So I usually rationalize, what's the best thing, worst case scenario type of deal. And I think that a misconception that a lot of people will have when they want to, whether start a company or become an entrepreneur or, try to lead a cause, is the fear of failure.
Exactly.
But what I've learned is that you're going to fail spectacularly several times and time again.
Right.
And so, I've failed spectacularly over the years, and it's more how you respond.
There you go.
To the failure. It's just part of it. Nobody's gonna do something in just 100% success every day. And so, there's been some really dark times. It's very lonely too. It's very lonely at times, but I just tell myself some of those tougher times that the sun's gonna rise tomorrow.
That's right. You're still here.
We'll be here tomorrow, and this is what we're going to do tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And if I want to go back, I can catalog all those spectacular failures. But they really seem less significant now, looking back, is at the time when we were going through them. So, yeah, I think that people are really afraid of failure, but you better embrace it because you're going to have some failure. If anytime you try to do something extraordinary or out of the ordinary, something to step out of your comfort zone, you better be ready you better be happy when things go good and able to accept when things go bad. So I think that's how I've dealt with the fear.
Jim, I think that's really powerful that you're conscious of that and articulate that, because every successful leader I know, myself included, has failed their way to the top, right? And so you have to, that's why we look at confidence, competence, courage, and calm as competencies. You have to develop the muscle of courage that's going to allow you to sit in that moment when I'm looking at my husband like, how do you feel about eating ramen noodles every day, right? Because cash flow is crazy. But it's also, I think, something that Jim talked about, that when you wake up that next day and you're like, I'm still breathing, I'm still here, nothing, you can get into catastrophic thinking. And that's why my company tagline is because leadership is not a job to do alone. I think part of what we do is we isolate ourselves in all of that. I'm able to sit in this every day because I sit with other women entrepreneurs and we talk openly, honestly, and authentically about the joy and challenge of entrepreneurship. And I'm going to tell you, not everybody's built for this. You have to be built to take the kinds of risks that Jim and I are taking on a daily basis to keep these companies open. You also, I find that when you're purpose-driven, about it, Gwen Inc. is the place I act on what I believe God has called me to do. Even though I'm fearful, I'm less fearful about it because I know that I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to do. But that didn't happen haphazardly. That happened because throughout my life, I've had people to help me figure that out. I realize now that I've been in conscious pursuit of my purpose through all of my career. I'm more conscious of that now. So I think when you're clear, it makes a difference. And Jim's absolutely right. When I support people in processing what their worst case scenario looks like, we all often are on the floor laughing because they're like, that's never going to really happen to me. I'm like, exactly. Because we have family and friends. None of my friends are going to let my family eat ramen noodles every day, which I happen to like, right? But I think when you get so catastrophic and you're thinking that if you don't have someone to support you through those moments, you will talk yourself out of pursuing your wildest dreams. So when people say to me, Gwen, how are you doing? I'm like, I am literally living my wildest dreams every day. And I do a lot of, I speak nationally about leadership. It's another part of what I do. I'm often talking to groups of entrepreneurs about risk-taking is what fuels your business, the growth of your business. So then we have to develop the confidence, competence, courage, and calm to sit in the ambiguity of risk. That's why I have people around me who keep me courageous but don't let me do anything crazy. I'm always very calculated about the risk that I take. And I'm pretty fearless at this point in my life. But I think if you develop some courage strategies, if you allow yourself to acknowledge that you're afraid and really play it out, what is really going to happen, so often what we think will happen, even if it does happen, we're going to be okay. And it's often then that I turn people to look at other people's lives. That's what lets me say to people, how dare you be afraid to do that? Tell me what your great-grandfather did. You know, in my culture, people came out of slavery. And a generation later, we're like millionaires, right? And so I think that we can get so isolated in our own fear that we will try to lead on our own. And I don't think any leader should do that. No. My tagline is, because leadership is not a job to do alone. I think the other thing is that perfectionism is a disease that affects a lot of people. I often say I'm in perfectionism rehab. But, you know, I really inspire my clients to shift their thinking. Because if you live in the lane of perfectionism, you're going to always feel like you're failing. I ask people to strive for excellence. And what I'm asking them to do is to get intentional. What is it that you really want to accomplish on any given day? Bust your butt to get that done. And at the end of the day, you got 3 of the 10 things done. Celebrate that and know that there's going to always be tomorrow. I think that perfectionism causes a high level of stress for the leaders that I support, regardless of gender. And with my women clients, I really caution them about that because I see a connection between perfectionism and mental and physical health. Mm-hmm. And when you look at what women die from stress-related illnesses, and women of color die disproportionately from stress-related illnesses. So I'm always asking people to experience failure, you know, to kind of get into a framework that it is part of the process. And every successful leader I know, including myself, has failed their way to the top. I'm able to incorporate Gwen because of every great business decision I made in my 2 previous companies or businesses and every bad decision I made in my previous companies. That's why I can stand courageously as the president and CEO of this company.
Love it. Mm-hmm. I like looking at other models for how we examine things like fear and failure. And one of the things that I decided early on in my business was to think about failure through the lens of getting out and flying an airplane. Mm-hmm. You know, you go up in an airplane and you've set your coordinates and you know where you're going. You always have this destination in mind, but 99% of the time you're not on course. Mm-hmm. Do you consider that to be failure? Right? That's not failure. You're just doing these minor corrections to keep you on track. And so I just kind of abandoned that thought. Mm-hmm. Like, what if you couldn't fail? What if there is no failure? What if it's just all this very rich learning experience that allows you, it's doing the same thing to fail your way to the next level. Because it's just part of the process. It's part of your journey.
Yeah, perspective matters. How you think about things is critical. Yeah. And how you think about things. And that's the other reason that my tagline is, because leadership isn't a job to do alone, because you can get so trapped inside your own head that you can talk yourself out of living your wildest dreams. And I can't stress enough that I have a group of people around me who keep me courageous and don't let me do anything crazy, because my wildest dreams are pretty big, right? But I think it's so important to give yourself the opportunity to live your wildest dreams, and then to put around you an infrastructure, both technical, emotional, spiritual, that enables you to just take that step, a step. Because on the other side of that step is another one and another one. And before you know it, that very thing you almost talked yourself out of doing, you discover you are doing. And it's just all part of the process.
I have a lot of people, not a lot, but people talk to me about, hey, I got this idea for a business.
Right.
And generally, they'll say, yeah, I don't know, I think it could be great, but, I don't really have time to do this. I'm like, well, what would be the first thing you had to do? What's the first thing you would do? And sometimes it's something really simple, like come up with a name or register a DBA or build a services portfolio, whatever it is. There's always a series of steps. So what I tell them to do is make that list.
Right.
And then check off number 1. And then after you do that, check off number 2. By the time you get to number 3 or 4, you're in. You're pretty much on your way.
Yeah, and you'll get the information you need along the way to determine whether or not that particular idea is going to be the idea from you. I allow people, part of my mentoring is if I meet a really talented, high potential, emerging entrepreneur, and they have a service my company needs, I immediately do business with them. I decide how much of my budget I want to spend with them to kind of let them use and experience with Gwen Inc. as their playground. And then I mentor them along the way. Or though with my mentees who want to launch not-for-profits, I will show up in their not-for-profit as an organizational mentor. And for a year, pro bono, just be behind the scenes, helping them think about a board of directors, helping them think about what does it mean to be a talented not-for-profit CEO. But you're so right, Jim. It's just, if you really have something on your heart to do, then it's important to do it. And I feel strongly about this, that season of grief I went through started with my daughter's cancer diagnosis. She's a beautiful, healthy 31-year-old woman. 5 years later, my father runs a historic political campaign up in Watertown, New York. I'm a Fort Drum kid. Gets sworn in, is the first African-American county legislator, gets a terminal cancer diagnosis, dies 6 months later. September 11th, 2001, my very first boyfriend, who stayed a best friend of mine my whole life, is a firefighter who goes into the World Trade Center, gets killed. Right after that, my best friend gets a cancer diagnosis, dies on September 3rd. I go on a vacation with my family, and later that fall, December 3rd, my younger sister, perfectly healthy, collapses and dies, right? I've been through 10 years. I actually wrote a part of an anthology, and my chapter in this book is called Thriving Through a Season of Grief. But all of that kind of stuff will teach you why not live. That's the way I feel about it. It's like life can change in a split second. If you have something on your heart to do, don't be crazy about it, but be courageous enough to test it, because I learned through that experience that every single breath I take matters. And there are so many people. The interesting thing about my executive coaching is people engage me with the thought that what they're really trying to do is stay in the place where they are now and discover through coaching that what they really want to do is possibly create the graceful exit strategy that allows them to transition out of that work that they're doing to live what they believe their passion is, And so I think that we owe it to ourselves to give ourselves the opportunity to just explore what is it that I might want to do and do it.
Yeah. Another thing I think is just that I've developed that I didn't have when I started this off is, trust in yourself that whatever it is that happens, that you'll be able to figure it out.
Exactly. Because
who knows? I've been doing this now for 18 years. I don't know what's going to happen 2 years from now, but there's going to be some unique challenges, and whatever it is, we'll figure out how to do it. So I do like your, what is it? Confidence, competence,
courage, and calm.
Courage and calm.
Yes.
And the courage goes along with confidence. I think they're pretty similar.
They all kind of. If you develop one competency, it will naturally lead you to the next one. Yeah. I'm always saying to people, you need to define your philosophy, skills, and behaviors that you want to use as a leader. So once you're clear, right, about all of that sort of personal mission stuff, then if I develop the skills to act on that and then use those skills to behave in a certain way, this is just true about me. Every single thing that I've ever needed to make my businesses come to fruition has come as a result of that combination of things that manifest itself through confidence, competence, courage, and calm. But, Jim, you're absolutely right about that. And that's the other thing. If you're someone who believes, my life is so interesting. I work with leaders who say these kinds of things to me. I don't need anybody else going in. I can do it on my own. And I say to them, how's that really working for you? Because I suspect that the reason I'm either in your company talking to you now because your boss engaged me, or you contacted me because somewhere in you, that living on that island isn't working for you. I don't technically need to be a CPA. I just technically need to know how to find the right one that I can trust enough when I have those business questions that are going on, or he'll pull my blazer and go, not today, girlfriend, don't do that, right? It's not in your company's best finances, but self-trust really matters. I would recommend a book. A couple of books to people, but one I'm recommending to everyone to read is The Speed of Trust. The one thing that it's The Speed of Trust by Stephen M. R. Covey, and I think it's The One Thing That Changes Everything is the subtitle. Okay. But that book, I literally kissed it after I read it, because there was this dynamic going on in the lives of my clients and in my client organizations that I couldn't get a handle on. And because seldom are these issues caused by a lack of brain power. Everyone has been smart enough to do what they needed to do. When I'm actually engaged with leadership teams or individual leaders, once I kind of got a handle on what trust looks like, I realized that what's going on are issues of low trust, and that's because there's low trust between and among people that's causing these companies to have a series of business issues. And so it's his work all starts with self-trust. Do you trust yourself?
Yeah.
Right? And so when I'm talking about confidence, that's what's in that lane for me. That you need to be confident enough that you know what to do or how to get what you need to be the kind of leader that you want to be, that you're confident in your company's mission, that you're confident in the people that are around you. So if you're a leader who has self-confidence, but you don't trust or have confidence in the people that are around you, you're not going to be successful, because everyone's success is the direct result of a relationship they have with someone else. So I'm always in companies going, hello, avatars don't come here and do work, right? You all are either having issues or being successful because of the nature of your relationship. So you're absolutely right. You know, when you trust yourself, you have to trust yourself enough to know that if I don't know it, that I trust myself enough to have somebody in my network who does. And that's why I don't think leadership is a job to do alone. I think if you find yourself in a place of leadership, you immediately need to put a network around you that's going to help you be successful.
Absolutely. And Gwen, I love that you talk about that, and we have to transition to wrap up, but that leads me to one thing that I was searching for in my life, which is that level of connection.
Right.
And also one of the other things that you talked about with the group of people you surround yourself with, the people who don't allow you to not be courageous. Mm-hmm. So that, coupled with this drive to stay connected, led me to this group called Own Your Human. Mm-hmm. It's a international personal and professional development leadership course and group of colleagues. That has kept me inspired, right? Because as a new mom and entrepreneur, connection doesn't always allow me to get out of the house, right? So being able to do this from my computer right at home, regardless of whether or not Jack is sleeping or awake, it doesn't matter. So that has really kept me inspired. So what I'd love to wrap up with today is one way that you would love to inspire our viewers today. How would you like to leave them heading into this incredible new year?
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity, because I have a practice that during the last week of any year, I really focus on what is it that I want to leave behind from the previous year and not take with me into the new year. So if I could inspire your listeners, viewers, to do one thing, it would be to really just spend some time in what I call the 3 R's: rest, reflection, and rejuvenation. And to make a commitment to yourself that in 2017 that you'll live one life, that you'll figure out who you are, what you believe, what you love, what you're not going to tolerate, and be that person everywhere you are, whether you're parenting, whether you're a professional, wherever you are, and do that. And to make that plan and to work it. Because in the end, what I truly believe is that everything rises and falls on your leadership, and that leadership fundamentally is making a conscious decision to be your authentic self and make decisions from that point of view, and then to get into the right relationships with people that allow you to live your wildest dreams. And as I'm doing that, what I'm observing is that my courage to do that, having the confidence, competence, courage, and calm to do that, is enabling me to do what I ultimately think I was called to do, which is to live my life in a way that it makes life better for generations of people in the future. So I hope that other people will muster the courage to do that and to not take baggage from 2016 into 2017, but just to give yourself permission to live one life, be your authentic self, and make sure that everything you do makes a difference for someone who will live, for 7 generations beyond you, as my Native American friends often say. And I think your life will be just so much better if you make that choice.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for
joining
me.
us.
Oh, it's my honor. I'm thrilled to be back in Seneca Falls. And Seneca Falls will always be part of my success story. So it's probably no accident that the last week of 2016 I'm sitting here and being able to practice what I just preached to your viewers and listeners.
So great.
Thank
and
you
hopefully
so much.
Everybody who's viewing will actually take some of that information to heart and spend some time this week doing those 3 R's. We're heading into an incredible new year, 2017. So what are you taking with you? What are you leaving behind? And we'll see you in the first couple of weeks of January, everybody. So God bless.